Morning. I'm Amber Nightingale Sultani, and I'm the Associate State Director for AARP here in Northern Virginia. I'm here this morning to provide a brief welcome remarks on behalf of AARP. We are thrilled to be continuing our collaboration with the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at George Mason University to bring our members just a sampling of the rich programs that they offer on a regular basis. From our earliest beginnings, AARP has championed lifelong learning. Our founder, Dr. Ethel Percy Andrews, once said that the eagerness to learn, to pioneer in the development of new skills, and the abilities to broaden the personal scopes of understanding, to freshen the mind with new ideas and new concepts, to achieve new heights of knowledge has no age restriction. And those words are as true today as they were when she spoke them in the 1950s. Studies have shown that challenging your brain in new ways throughout your life may strengthen your brain. Our brain is stimulated and makes new connections when we learn new things or pursue new interest. So AARP encourages you to stay curious and give yourself a good mental workout by doing something that challenges your thinking, offers you enjoyment, and encourages you to grapple with new and complex ideas. And I want to now turn the program over to Jennifer DeSano, who is the director of OLLI at Mason. Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Amber. Hello, everyone, and thank you. Welcome to the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at George Mason University. We've been in existence now for over 30 years, and we serve curious individuals who participate in lectures, clubs, trips, and special events, as well as volunteer opportunities such as teaching and service on committees. There are many things that you can learn and do at the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at George Mason University. I want to welcome all of our OLLI Mason members, as well as those of you who are in Virginia and across the United States online through our AARP connection. You can learn more about OLLI at olli.gmu.edu. And we are in the midst of our winter registration right now, so it's a great time to join if you're interested in doing that. We're very happy to be collaborating to bring our wonderful presenter today, Rabbi Bruce Aft. Rabbi Aft is a graduate of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College in Philadelphia and has been the spiritual leader at Congregation Adat Aram in Springfield for 26 years. In addition to his congregational responsibilities, he spent 29 years working at the BBYO International Kala, a Jewish leadership program for teenagers. Feeding his passion for improving race relations, Aft has served on the Operation Understanding DC board for almost 20 years by promoting dialogue between Black and Jewish teens. He has been an adjunct professor at Marymount University, George Mason University, and the University of Mary Washington. Please welcome Rabbi Bruce Aft.
Well, thank you. I guess that's my cue then, huh? I think, Jennifer, I start, right?
Yes, please.
All righty. It's great to be with all of you today. I've never done this for AARP before. Does AARP stand for American Association of Rabbi People? Okay. She said you were going to stretch your brain. She didn't say you were going to stretch your patience, as you have to endure some of my humor, okay, or lack thereof, okay, because the other people on the panel shut off their cameras. I can't see whether they're laughing or they're grimacing. So I'm going to hope that unless I get muted, that they were at least smiling at that comment. And I am happy to be here today to be able to be with you. I do need to begin. I'm going to be interspersing, particularly here at the beginning, a little bit of humor because I do want this to be a hopeful presentation. We spent a long time trying to put this date together, and then I realized that we were doing this on the first day of Hanukkah. We lit the Hanukkah menorah last night, and for the first candle, and what better time to do something on hope than on the first day of Hanukkah, which is a reminder of the spirit of the Maccabees, the people in ancient Greece who were able to rededicate the temple and were able to, keep the light burning. I want to begin in a way that I would guess if people were betting, nobody on this webinar would have bet that I would have started this way. And that is with an excerpt from the lyrics of Jefferson Airplane in their song Miracle. If only you believe like I believe, baby, we'd get by. If only you believe in miracles, so would I. If only you believed in miracles, I might move heaven and earth to prove it to you. It goes on to talk about, in a very different setting than we will today, the miracle of love. And yet I believe that for our subject here today, the miracle of hope is attainable. Anybody who woke up this morning and watched any news program knows that there is still another virus that we could be worried about. Many of us could be worried about the fact that on Friday, the stock market dropped 2.5%. There are a lot of things that could keep us from being hopeful. And yet I am going to be very hopeful here today, because part of what I'm doing here today is I'm going to be making reference to a book which was in the description. I think I'm doing this well enough so that people can see it. It's Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And he himself is the founder of logotherapy, the search for meaning, was able to find hope in the midst of the concentration camps in Europe. And if he could find hope, so can we. I'm reminded of the quote that is said in the diary of Anne Frank that suggests that in spite of it all, I still believe in humanity. And if Anne Frank could believe in humanity, if Viktor Frankl could believe in hope, then I think it's incumbent upon us to take as a lesson their desire to be hopeful and to be able to somehow integrate that into their lives. I will also tell you that as I do this presentation, my wife very nicely has made me some hot apple cider. And if you don't believe what I'm saying, she said, make sure they see your cup. So you have to believe me about hope, because as you can see from the cup, it says, I think I'm doing this right. It says, trust me, I'm a rabbi. Okay, so I hope that people will trust that there is the possibility of hope in our world. And I do want to begin with telling you a joke, because then you'll be hopeful that I will not tell any more jokes. One of the silver linings of the pandemic has been the ability to work from home and to do a number of these webinars or Zoom calls or whatever. But one of the downsides has been that because I often do these in my living room, my wife hears the same jokes over and over and over and over and over again. So she said, why don't you tell the folks this one today when you're speaking? So I said, okay, I'll try. And again, unless somebody puts their face on the screen, I won't know how it played, but I'm going to tell you that she said I should ask what the difference is between a US savings bond and a man. That was her question to me this morning. What is the difference between a US savings bond and a man? And the response, of course, is that a US savings bond matures. Now, I told that to somebody else earlier this morning. Ooh, I did get somebody laughing in the chat. So from Terry, I'm very grateful. Nancy, who said laugh out loud. The 72 of you who said I should be muted. That wasn't very nice of you to put that into the chat. That was a joke. The person this morning said that she felt the difference between a US savings bond and a man was that a US savings bond can be redeemed. I thought that was a little bit harsh, but another response that was worthy, I believe. Okay, and Gail is laughing a lot. Don't you dare tell your husband that, or your male partner, if there is one, or your partner in general, that you heard that from a man. Otherwise, I'll be in trouble. Okay, to what you all pay big bucks to hear. Peter, Paul, and Mary. They are my introduction to hope. We're going to go from Jefferson Airplane to Peter, Paul, and Mary, to Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, to Viktor Frankl. And we're going to do all that interspersing with questions and opportunities for people to be able to raise issues that I might not be thinking of. You'll all remember the lyrics of Peter, Paul, and Mary's song, Light One Candle. And I think that if we remember these, this is a first step, not an exclusive step, but a first step toward building hope in our world. Light one candle for the Maccabee children with thanks that their light didn't die. Light one candle for the pain they endured when their right to exist was denied. Light one candle for the terrible sacrifice justice and freedom demand. But light one candle for the wisdom to know when the peacemaker's time is at hand. Don't let the light go out. It's lasted for so many years. Don't let the light go out. Let it shine through our hope and our tears. Light one candle for the strength that we need to never become our own foe. And light one candle for those who are suffering pain we learned so long ago. Light one candle for all we believe in, that anger not tear us apart. And light one candle to find us together with peace as the song in our hearts. Don't let the light go out. It's lasted for so many years. Don't let the light go out. Let it shine through our hope and our tears. What is the memory that's valued so highly that we keep it alive in that flame? What's the commitment to those who have died that we cry out they've not died in vain? We have come this far, always believing that justice would somehow prevail. This is the burden. This is the promise. This is why we will not fail. Don't let the light go out. Don't let the light go out. Don't let the light go out. So, of all those parts of those lyrics, I believe that it may be that the most important one is that we light one candle for all we believe in, that anger not tear us apart. We live in a world where if I was going to be hopeless, and I am not hopeless, I am hopeful, I think that I would say that the thing that might lead me to a sense of despair would be that we have let anger tear us apart. And there are so many ways in the introduction, which happens all the time. I think I'm going to have to rewrite the bio that I have submitted, because every time somebody introduces me, they talk about my congressional life, and then they say, whoops, we mean congregational life. Well, I think as challenging as it was to serve Adat Re'im for 29 years and serve them now as the emeritus, okay, I think that congressional life is tougher than congregational life, because in congregational life, ultimately we built consensus. We were able to embody the words of the psalmist who says how good and pleasant it can be when we come together. Hine ma tovu manayim shevet achim gam yachad. And we live in a world, whether it be over spending bills, whatever side of the aisle you're on, whether it be on mask wearing, vaccine getting, we have let anger tear us apart instead of hope bring us together. And my hope is that after this presentation today, that we will use some of the words that I will be sharing with you to build a more hopeful world, particularly during this time, this holiday season. Because if we're not going to be able to build hope during this holiday season, when will we be able to build a more hopeful world? So that is all by way of introduction. I am going to pause here for a second just to sort of skim things. I think there's some concerns about volume. I will let the people in charge here deal with those. I hope that people can still hear me. Jennifer, if the people can't hear me, I'm sure you'll let me know if you're having trouble. Is that correct, Jennifer? Jump in just to let me know.
I am not having trouble hearing you, but Christina, who is our having the most problem, is better now. And I have turned on captioning for those people who are having some troubles hearing it, so you can read it.
All right, very good. So thank you. And Suzanne just said she's hearing me fine. And so that is good. So I am going to keep going. There was an article that Rabbi Jonathan Sachs wrote many years ago for a site called My Jewish Learning. And everybody is certainly more than encouraged to be able to check out myjewishlearning.com and to check Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, probably put in Jonathan Sachs, S-A-C-K-S, on hope. And the article will come up. He was the former chief rabbi of the British Empire. He had been a very noted speaker and writer. He has a weekly blog. Unfortunately, during the past year, he passed away. He had written a number of articles to be for each weekly portion of the week that the Jewish people read on the Sabbath and during the week. He had written articles for this coming year, and certainly one can go to his archives to be able to find information about the weekly Torah reading and a whole variety of subjects, including Hanukkah. He's written 8 wonderful thoughts for Hanukkah, a couple of which I'll be sharing later on in this presentation. But in the article that was written for My Jewish Learning, he writes, Judaism is a sustained struggle against the world that is in the name of the world that could be, but is not yet. I'm going to repeat that. Judaism is a sustained struggle against the world that is in the name of the world that could be, but is not yet. We all remember, it was a quote, I think, by George Bernard Shaw, but made more famous, I think, by Robert Kennedy, who suggested that some people see things as they are and say, why? I dream things that never were and say, why not? So I would say, why not have hope? Why not have hope? Why not fill our world with hope? What is keeping us from being able to do that? I think that we all could have different responses to that question, but his comment, and I don't think it's just a Jewish issue, it's a human issue, that we all struggle against a world that is in the name of a world that could be, but is not yet. And let's think about one of the most formative moments, as he writes, in the history of my faith, of Judaism, that came in the encounter between Moses and God in the burning bush. You may remember, if you've read the Bible, that in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible particularly, that Moses asked God what name he should use when people ask him who he is. God replies in a phrase that occurs nowhere else in the Bible, Ehyeh asher ehyeh. I was what I was, I am what I am, and I will be what I will be. Okay, the idea is that I will be what I will be, that God's name belongs to a future tense. His call to us is that which is not yet, because if we have faith, we can create what is not yet. So for those of us who say, where is my faith going to lead me? My faith, my belief in the divine presence is going to lead me to a place that is not yet, and that place is a place of hope. There's a recognition that we may not be there yet. We all have examples, I hope, I pray, that we all have examples of where hope has manifested itself at one point or another in our lives, even if at this moment we are in despair. I know there is an exercise that I did with people over Thanksgiving where I would say the morning blessings, which include praised are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe. And then I would pause and I would ask them to mention something for which they were giving thanks. Just as a sidebar, we know that in Jewish life, that when one prays, one is able to fulfill their obligation to pray by saying amen to any prayer that someone else offers, with one exception. And that is that each one of us has to find something for which to give thanks. We cannot say amen to someone else's prayer. We can, but we haven't fulfilled our obligation to pray, because we each need to find something for which to give thanks. And I would extend that to say that when we look for things for which we can give thanks, no matter how bleak things may be, that when we find something for which to give thanks, we are bringing hope into our world. We had some guests in for Thanksgiving who had never seen the MLK Memorial, and we took them to see it. And for those who have been there, you know that the stone was taken out from out of the mountain, from out of the, I'm paraphrasing, from out of the mountain of despair, there should be hope. That is the central vision of Martin Luther King Jr., that all of us somehow in the midst of our despair will hold on to a not yet moment. Even the famous Jewish philosopher Franz Rosenzweig, when he was asked if he was going to observe a particular Jewish ritual, he said, "Not yet." This was a man who was on the verge of converting from Judaism, but found meaning at a service on Yom Kippur, on our Day of Atonement. And when they asked him if he was performing a certain ritual, he said, "Not yet." They talk about the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism, who, as he was praying one time and did not feel the support of his community, felt as if he was climbing a ladder. And as he reached for each rung, the rung would fall off in his hand. And when he turned around and saw that people weren't with him in his prayers, he began to teeter on that ladder and almost fall off, because there's a recognition for all of us to reach the rung ahead of us, the rung above us. To climb the ladder, we need each other. How many of us remember the story of Jacob having his dream and waking with his head on a rock and saying, "I dreamt that there were angels ascending and descending a ladder going toward heaven." The recognition that as we climb our ladder, it can lead us to hope. We may not be there yet, but we are climbing. A colleague of mine, Rabbi Sidney Greenberg, once when he was traveling with his children, were continued to be asked on their journey, "Are we there yet? Are we there yet?" And he raised the question, what happens if when we get there, we find out that there isn't there and we've missed the journey? I think that part of the journey to hope is that we may never fully get there, but that the journey to not yet can be a hopeful one. And if we journey together, if we climb that ladder, if we strive for hope, then we can create a better world. Because after all, Ehyeh asher ehyeh, I will be what I will be. I will accompany you to your not yet moment. Okay, think about this for a second. And let's use a biblical character as our paradigm. I think all of us, whether there are Jews, Christians, Muslims, or people of other faiths on this webinar, we all remember God's call to Abraham to leave his land, his birthplace, his father's house, to travel to a place that I will show you. 7 times God promises Abraham that land, yet he has to haggle with the Hittites, even to buy one small plot in which to bury Sarah. And that land, even today, is a land in the Middle East for which there is great conflict over who can live where and who should be responsible for what. Okay, we know that even God's promise to Abraham is a not yet moment, being told that I will take you to a land I will show you. He gets to the land, but he has not been able to realize that not yet moment where everyone can live there in peace. Exodus begins with a story asking Moses to lead our people back to freedom in the promised land. And Moses doesn't get to the promised land. He gets to the verge of it. And yet it takes the next generation to get into the promised land that isn't so promised and that is filled with all sorts of conflict. I think that as we think about what hope means to us, I continue to emphasize the not yet moment that we all feel we are living in, that maybe it's not attainable. And I have made the case, I hope so far, that we are living in a time in which we aren't there yet, but that the journey can be a hopeful one. Jennifer, what I'm going to do there is I'm going to pause because I've been going for about 20 minutes, and I want to see if there are any questions or comments that you wanted to share before I go on.
Meg, I'll let you go ahead. Thank you.
Currently, there are no outstanding questions in the chat or the questions. It's more about sound. I do have several people with their hands up, but that is really too cumbersome. It takes a lot of permissions and a lot of time to get them to talk.
Okay, so do you want to, or I guess I can because they're all hearing this. If those people whose hands are up, if you could type the question in the chat so that Meg or Jennifer could share them, I will pause for a breath again in a few minutes. Take a moment to type those up, okay? And do you folks see anybody sleeping yet? Can you see the people on the webinar? If anybody's sleeping yet?
We don't get to see them either. So if they're sleeping, we don't know about it.
Okay, thanks for that reinforcement. I
You're welcome.
appreciated it. They're not sleeping yet. Is that what you were trying to say?
We can't
In
see
terms
them,
of
so
the
we don't
not yet.
know.
I know that was a joke. That was
Okay.
a joke. Okay.
But to reinforce, Gail says, so far, this is amazing. So you are getting positive feedback.
I paid her to say that, so thank you for that. Thank you. So anyway, here we go. We're going to keep going. Let's talk about the first four narratives. And I want to create this historical background that Rabbi Sachs gives, because we're in this together, folks, and it's very hopeful to me. I will tell you that there was nothing that was more reaffirming than being with two of our four children over Thanksgiving. And not that it's ever reaffirming for a parent to hear struggles that their children are going through, but to realize that the struggles my wife and I feel, somewhat isolated because of the virus and not being able to see our family as often as we would like to, but to realize that, yeah, we're all struggling in this not yet phase of our lives, to realize that, you know, we are on a path. And again, as I've said a couple of times, the path can be hopeful. Let's take a look. Okay, we have Adam and Eve. Okay, Adam and Eve have freedom. They have everything they could possibly want. Okay, by the way, just to make sure you're still listening, one of the other jokes that my wife said I needed to tell, just to even the score, is that Adam, who had it all in the Garden of Eden, but was living there alone, finally said to God, God, this just isn't working. I need somebody to share this with. To which God said, I'll tell you what, Adam, I will create a companion for you, someone who will support you, who you can support, who will be your sort of fellow traveler throughout the garden and ultimately on your journey through life. And she will be a good listener. You will find each other attractive. You will be able to communicate with each other. It will make your life less lonely. So Adam was thrilled to have that companionship. So Adam said, God, thank you so much. And God said, but Adam, I do have to tell you that in order for me to create this may cost you an arm and a leg. To which Adam replied, God, what do you have for a rib? Okay, it's always easier when you can see people's faces to see if they even got the joke. At any rate, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, okay, they do have a freedom once they know each other, but then their journey gets interrupted because they don't follow directions. And it ends up being a somewhat tragic story in certain ways as they leave the Garden of Eden and they have to wander. Okay. And they try to initially, it's probably the first cover up because God wants to know what they've done when they eat from the fruit and they try to hide from God. Again, for those of us in the Washington, D.C. area, we know sometimes it's not the act that's nearly as bad as the cover up is. Okay, in terms of having ramifications and consequences. So Adam and Eve on their journey starts out with about as hopeful as you can be. And that hope turns into a journey. Not going to say a non-hopeful one, but it does change the playing field for them. Then we have Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel. Can you imagine the paradigm if Cain had turned to Abel and instead of them getting in a fight and then Cain killing Abel over the sacrifice that gets given to God and which one God accepts? Can you imagine if Cain and Abel had gone to the equivalent of the Starbucks that was back there in those days and talked it through? We might have a totally different paradigm for how to deal with our differences. So we have Cain and Abel, we have Adam and Eve, then we have the generation of the flood that was surrounded by all kinds of evil. And then we have the builders of the Tower of Babel. Okay, people have used their freedom and their opportunity to hope to transgress boundaries or deprive others of their freedom. So in every generation, a new beginning becomes necessary. So why should we be different? In a world in which we are all struggling to try to figure out how we can come together, we need to search that out for ourselves because we don't have a lot of good examples of it. Okay, Abraham's told to leave all the things that constrain freedom, his land, his birthplace, his father's house, and begin a new kind of life in a covenant with God. Perhaps for those of us, particularly of Jewish and Christian faith, part of building a more hopeful world is to enact the words of Jeremiah and Ezekiel, the prophets of the Bible, and start a new covenant a covenant which Jesus called a covenant of love, a covenant where we can come together, not just obligatory ways, but in a way in which we fulfill the vision of the Old Testament, the vision of the Torah, which has been put into so many different languages. Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself. Perhaps it wasn't such a trite lyric that suggests what the world needs now is love, sweet love. That's the only thing there's much too little of. Many of us on this webinar remember those words to that song. And if we can liberate ourselves to begin a new covenant, to remind ourselves that the main teaching, which all of us agree upon, that are part of our scriptural roots, is love your neighbor as yourself. And so perhaps that's where we need to begin, by looking at our relationship with ourselves. There is a Rabbi Hillel who suggests a wonderful quote that says, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? I think the first one to recommend self-care. He also said, if I'm only for myself, what am I? We're not in this alone. We are part of a community that needs to come together. And for those of us who have procrastinated dealing with these challenges, if not now, when? If not now, when? We need to take care of ourselves. We need to take care of our world. And we need to recognize that if not now, when? There is an urgency to us finding hope. There is an opportunity for us as we approach a new secular year to be able to go forward with some sort of renewed new covenant. I wanted to say a few words because I alluded to it earlier in the presentation that we are on the first day of Hanukkah. I want to remind people who are Jewish of the debate about how one lights the Hanukkah menorah. Not whether you put the candles in left to right or right to left. We do put them in right to left because that's the way we read Hebrew. We light them left to right so that each day gets its one day to be lit first. Each candle gets its opportunity to be first. Because if we care that much about each candle being able to be lit first, then how much we are going to care about people having their day in the light, their day to recognize that each one of our contributions can be meaningful and can help light up the darkness to our world and that's in our world. Any of you who are on this webinar who think, well, you know, he's talking about great stuff, but what can I do? Each one of you represents a candle of hope, a flicker of light that can ignite a spark, that can create illumination of the darkness. And we all know it's used way too much, but it so fits. Rather than curse the darkness, let us figure out a way to light a candle to find our way. So the debate about lighting the menorah isn't about which way you put the candles and it isn't which way you light them first. Those are things I just suggested. But the real debate is, do we light one candle the first night? Do we light two the second night? Do we light three the third night? Do we go up till 8 the 8th night? Is that what we do? We light all 8 candles on the 8th night, which is basically the custom that probably all of us follow. That was Rabbi Hillel's thought. But Rabbi Shammai suggested, no. We need to light all 8 candles the first night, down to 1 the last night, because the oil was the most powerful, the oil that Judah Maccabee found to keep the eternal light burning, to keep that lamp burning in the temple. That was most powerful the first night. So of course we should light 8 candles the first night. It's only intuitive to light all 8 candles because the oil was strongest. And by the last night, the oil was at its weakness. But Rabbi Hillel said, no. The miracle got greater every night. So we light an additional candle to remind us that when it comes to making miracles, to adding holiness to our lives, we never subtract, we always add. And each one of our candles, each one of our sparks helps make that holiness stronger. Now it's interesting. My good friend, teacher, mentor, Avi West, passed away during this past year at a much too young age due to COVID complications and vulnerabilities that he had. He was vaccinated and just unfortunately and tragically passed away at a much too young age. And he last year told me that he had lit 2 menorahs, 2 lamps, one where every night you lit an additional candle, because that's what Rabbi Hillel says, and he's the one we follow. But he also lit one, according to Rabbi Shammai, to say that maybe we need to be respectful of people's differences. And for some, the light is diminishing each night. And for some, the light is increasing each night. And we need to help those who feel like their holiness is decreasing, those whose light is getting less each night. We need to provide light to them. And when the 2 menorahs met in the middle, toward the middle of Hanukkah, when one was at about the same number of candles as the one going up, the one going down, they met in the middle. There was a recognition that when we come together, we can find the most holiness in our lives. And why do we follow the school of Hillel and build upon holiness? We follow the school of Hillel because before he would render a position, he would listen to everyone else's position. Shammai would just pontificate. Somebody would ask him a question, he would respond. He would not listen to what other people were having to say. Whereas Rabbi Hillel would always listen to what other people would have to say before he would express his opinion. What a beautiful way to build holiness and hope in our world, if we would only listen to each other. Unfortunately, this morning I had to offer the Jewish equivalent of last rites, the final confessional, for someone in hospice by phone because we can't get in to see her. And I was giving this presentation, so I needed to do it by phone. And we said the prayer which says, Shema Yisrael, listen Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. What gives us hope, in my opinion, obviously, is when we are able to listen to each other. Because Rabbi Hillel's ability to listen is what gave him the hope that we can increase the holiness in our lives, bit by bit, candle by candle, spark by spark. And now if I'm going to listen, I'm going to pause again to see if anybody has typed any questions into the chat so that they can be sure that they get their questions out there. So Jen or Meg, you lit up. So I'm going to trust you might have a couple questions.
Yes. Linda asks, are there any books you recommend reading? Also websites you recommend aside from what you've already mentioned? And I'm going to suggest that if you would like, you can take time and send that list to Ollie and we can send it out later so you don't have to do it on the fly.
I will do that. I certainly would recommend, and I will put this in a note to Ollie. I'll probably send it to you, Velma, and then you can forward it on since you're always my contact. And thank you for arranging this. By the way, I should have said that at the beginning. Velma Berkey and Barry, who hopefully are listening in. Happy Hanukkah to you for arranging this and for making this happen a couple times a year. And to all the people at Ollie for inviting me back. When I heard that Rich Rubenstein gives lectures for you folks, I feel honored to be in the same company as him, to be a fellow lecturer. But to answer the question that you just raised, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, myjewishlearning.com. And I would suggest another book that I've reviewed a number of times. Be happy to review it for Ollie at some time in the future. It's a long book, but it's a book called Morality by Jonathan Sacks, where he suggests, the book is called Morality, that what will create a more hopeful world is when we go from an I culture in bowling alone to a we culture, when we recognize that we are all in this together. It's a fascinating study. He talks about it from political and economic and spiritual angles, and it is just a tremendous, tremendous inspiration. And I will put together a reading list that I will submit. So another question there, Meg?
Terry says, thanks for combining lyric truth quotes, joy, laughter, and love with this powerful, hopeful talk. I'm grateful I'm here.
Well, thank you for that. The check's in the mail.
The next one is more for me. No, I cannot allow copying of the transcript, but what I will do is I will save a copy of the transcript and send it to both Jennifer and Amber.
Okay.
Oh, somebody found out that they could save it. Never mind. But I will still send a copy to Jennifer and Amber. And Kathy says, wow, information on the menorah is fascinating. Let me see if there's any more. Got to be able to scroll down somehow. Nope, that's it.
Okay, so let me talk about the future tense, and then I'm going to talk a little bit, probably more than a little bit, about despair, because whenever I've given this presentation before or given this as a high holiday sermon aspects of this or whatever I have, there are always people who say, yeah, this guy's a lucky guy. He can be hopeful, but he just doesn't get the despair that I'm feeling. And I will tell you quite honestly where it came up, and I never was able to resolve this for people, is it is customary on our day, Jewish New Year of Rosh Hashanah, to be able to read the story about, we talk about the birth of the world spiritually, and we talk about the birth of Isaac, who ends up becoming the transitionary character from Abraham to Jacob, who ultimately are the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the patriarchs, together with Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, the matriarchs of the Jewish people. We talk about the birth of Isaac, and there are always people there who are unable to give birth. And they're always very upset that we're talking about that birth, not because they feel that we shouldn't talk about it, but it just raises all sorts of feelings of despair. And one, probably the most serious mistake that I made in the rabbinate, and I made quite a few, just ask some of my former congregants, they'll give you a list from here to the Atlantic or Pacific Ocean or wherever people are listening in from. Okay, but probably in my view, the most serious mistake that I made is when someone came up to me and they said, you just don't understand the despair we feel when we talk about birth because we can't give birth. And I said, yeah, I know how you feel, but, and then they said, no, you don't know how we feel. So I want to own the fact that for those of you who are in despair, who are listening in, I don't know how you feel. And I don't mean to diminish what you are feeling in terms of despair. Only through the writings in a moment of Viktor Frankl, I hope that I will be able to inspire you, at least, or his words will be able to inspire you, because I can't possibly understand what Viktor Frankl went through either. And yet he was able to, and Frank was able to find some hope in our world. And I'm hoping that they might serve as sort of examples of people who are able to find hope in the midst of the strong despair which you're feeling. But before I do that, I wanted to just conclude this section with a thought from Rabbi Sachs, who says, human beings are the only life form capable of using the future tense. Only beings who can imagine the world other than it is are capable of freedom. And if we are free, the future is open, dependent on us. We can know the beginning of our story, but not the end. That is why, as God is about to take the Israelites from slavery to freedom, God tells Moses, I will be what I will be. Judaism is a religion of freedom, as faith is in the potential of the future. As humans, not as humans of any particular religion, we all do have the ability to look, however bleak or hopeful it may be, into the future. Okay. Western civilization, Rabbi Sachs writes, is the product of two cultures, ancient Greece and ancient Israel. The Greeks believed in fate. The future is determined by the past. Jews believed in freedom. There is no evil decree that cannot be averted. The Greeks gave the world the concept of tragedy. Jews gave it the idea of hope. Okay. I think that, how does that play out? I'm going to give an example. I'm proud of this. I am going to pat myself on the back, but it's not me. It's the Honors College at George Mason University. I have 25 students in the class. Okay, I gave them the night off and asked them if they would, on their own time, log in to a presentation by Sarah Hurwitz, who wrote the book Here All Along. She is a former speechwriter for the Obamas and has a wonderful political career, as well as now being a noted author of a Jewish book. She was giving a presentation where she was being interviewed, and she was immensely inspirational. When I went into the next class of my honors section at George Mason and said, what do you folks think the percentage was of those of you who logged on to that presentation on your own time to be able to hear her? One student raised his hand and said 60%. One student raised her hand and said 70%. One student raised their hand and said 80%. 100% of those students signed on. And I think the reason they signed on is because they had hope that she would inspire them to have a more hopeful future. And she did. She told them that some of the elements of hope are based upon the ability to take a risk, the ability to not be overwhelmed by the magical resume that we think someone else has, that we have as much of a right to try to do something as the next person, that the magic resume that somebody is better qualified than we are, okay, is the magic resume doesn't exist, that we should believe in ourselves, that we should take risks. She described a situation where she kind of messed up a speech and she missed getting in the motorcade to go to the airport, to go to wherever the speech was going to be. So she rode on Marine One with the president, and she's frantically working on her computer as she's preparing the speech. And the president turns to her and says, "Put down your computer for a second." And she says, "But Mr. President, I got to get your speech ready." He says, "You'll get it ready. Enjoy the view." And in that moment of humanness, she realized that she was glad she was working where she was, because she learned that no matter how high an office somebody holds, there still are opportunities for us to be human. And that can be very, very hopeful. So in her presentation, she was able to inspire hope and courage in many of the students who felt 100% of them that it was worthwhile to sign up. And why do I use that as an anecdote? Because I think everybody on this webinar, ultimately, however much despair we're facing, does believe in the potential of a future. We know the national anthem of the state of Israel is Hatikva, okay? The hope. I think that each one of us deep down wants to be hopeful, okay? And finally, Rabbi Sachs's point about the future tense is, and I'm changing the word Jew to be human because I believe he's speaking for humanity. To be human is to be an agent of hope in a world serially threatened by despair. Every ritual, every syllable of the story we can tell is a protest against resignation or a blind acceptance of that Greek tragedy of fate. All of us are engaged in a sustained struggle, perhaps in our generation among the greatest ever known, against a world that is, in the name of a world that could be, should be, but is not yet. There is no more challenging vocation. Throughout history, human beings have been inspired by the story of light. Last night, I just keep giving anecdotes because these are such real experiences that inspire hope in me. I'm helping out a group in Fauquier County. I was someplace I've never been, despite the fact that I was traveled to wherever it was, thankfully for a GPS. Otherwise, I'd still be wandering around out there. I looked up at the sky. It was far enough out that you could almost see the Milky Way last night out there. And what we did is, in our own traditions, we lit the menorah, and there was a communal lighting of a Christmas tree out in Marshall, Virginia. I think that was the name of the town. And a Black minister concluded, after I had used the words from Light One Candle, by saying, "May God be with you until we meet again." And I would alter that to a group like this to say, "May your faith be with you," the faith that we together can create a better future. So now that we've talked about the future, let me talk a little bit about man's search for meaning and what Viktor Frankl had to say. Now, I'm going to tell you that in every generation, I read this book a little bit differently. He has a chapter for those who might have read the book, and I know some of you have been in touch with me that you were reading the book. On page 128, Viktor Frankl has a section called The Existential Vacuum. Okay. And he writes, the existential vacuum is a widespread phenomenon of the 20th century. Okay. When a year ago, and I'm fine now, at least physically, but a year ago, as you know, because I've given a couple presentations since then, when I was lying in a hospital bed having just had a heart attack, I have subsequently wrestled during this past year with an existentialism that I never thought I personally would have to wrestle with. I've found great meaning in life. I'm very blessed. I'm very hopeful, and I'm very lucky. But in that moment, I faced, because of the recognition of my own vulnerability and mortality, this idea of an existential vacuum, an existential vacuum. When he wrote the book, he said that a statistical survey, and this is very dated, but I would suggest the statistics would be even greater now, is that 25% showed a more or less marked degree of existential vacuum. And he said that that was amongst European students. Amongst his American students, it was 60%. I would make the case that everybody on this screen, everyone in this webinar at one point or another has suffered from an existential vacuum. And he says, why does it show itself? Why does it manifest? Because in some ways we might find ourselves in a state of boredom. We have lived without some of the challenges and joys and hope, if you will, of being together over these past couple of years. And for some of us, we may just be bored of looking at a screen. For some of us, we're very hopeful that we can do that because we're not able to get out. But for many of us, we may be suffering from boredom. Now, I'm not going to suggest boredom like we got nothing to do. There are things to do, but the boredom of the inability to have human contact. For those of you who read the newspapers on the weekend, and with it being Thanksgiving weekend, I had the luxury of reading both the Washington Post and New York Times. Those aren't commercials. I can't remember right now, but in one of them, it talked about the power of touch to be able to give us a sense of hope, to realize in those hugs that we used to be able to give each other before COVID hit, that there was a certain hopefulness, that there was a certain presence that we felt from each other. He calls it something called Sunday neurosis. And he says that's a kind of depression that afflicts people who become aware of the lack of content in their lives when the rush of the busy week is over and the void within themselves becomes manifest. Not a few cases of suicide can be traced to this existential vacuum. He writes that such widespread phenomenon as depression, aggression, and addiction are not understandable unless we recognize the existential vacuum underlying them. He says this is true of pensioners, of aged people, of young people. And he says there are various masks and guises under which the existential vacuum appears. Okay. Sometimes the frustrated will to meaning is vicariously compensated for by a will to power. I'm going to repeat that because it's big language. But he says the frustrated will to meaning is vicariously compensated for by a will to power. Think about how that may manifest itself in terms of some of the relationships that we see, whatever side of the aisle we're on. Is it possible that it's an expression of hopelessness that has driven us to be in such a 50-50 split in the United States of America and throughout the world? Is it possible that simply by a four-letter word that we would be able to create a sense of unity again, just by being able to live the words that we're talking about today, that four-letter word being hope? Okay, we all know plenty of four-letter words that we could share right now, but how many of us think of hope as a four-letter word? You know, somebody said in one of the columns that I was reading that in 2022 or in Thanksgiving 2021, we need to give thanks for the United States in a world in which we've become the disunited states. And I think that perhaps hope may be part of the answer. Maybe I'm autobiographically being just too self-serving here. But when I saw out of the mountain of despair to build a mountain of hope, or out of the stone of despair, I think is the accurate quote, to build a mountain of hope. If Martin Luther King Jr. could do it in his generation, if Abraham could leave home and leave what was familiar to him, if Moses could lead a people out of slavery, if Jesus could talk about a new covenant of love, if Muhammad could ascribe hope for humanity, all of our great religious leaders, if those of you who are subscribed to Eastern religion can find hope through your own religious connection, if they could do it, then why can't we do it? If not now, when? Again, to requote Rabbi Hillel. And how do we do it? He writes on page 130, okay, in a section called The Meaning of Life. He writes, I doubt whether a doctor can answer this question in general terms, for the meaning of life differs from human to human. I'm changing his writing from man to man because he was writing in a non-egalitarian time when people were using the word man generically, and I want to try to amend that here. Okay, he says that for the meaning of life differs from human to human, from day to day, and from hour to hour. What matters, therefore, is not the meaning of life in general, but the specific meaning of a person's life at a given moment. To put the question in general terms would be comparable to the question posed to a chess champion. Tell me, master, what is the best move in the world? There simply is no such thing as the best or even a good move apart from a particular situation in a game and the particular personality of one's opponent. The same holds true for human existence. One should not search for an abstract meaning of life. Everyone has their own specific vocation or mission in life to carry out a concrete assignment which demands fulfillment. Therefore, we cannot be replaced, nor can our life be repeated. There is a recognition that each of us matters. And to me, to wake up in the morning and realize that I matter, that's pretty hopeful. I'm going to give thanks that I matter. Thus, everyone's task is as unique as our specific opportunity to implement it. So however in despair one is, however I can't relate to you because of the despair you're feeling, you bring with it a unique ability to find a way to bring hope into your world, into our world. And so he writes, ultimately, we should not ask what the meaning of life is, but rather we should recognize that it is we who are asked. In a word, each of us is questioned by life, and we can only answer to life by answering for our own lives. Okay, in Judaism, and it's pretty well known throughout the world, people say l'chaim, to life. Okay, we are responsible for bringing hope into our world. To quote a Yiddish phrase for any of us who are going to say, even after this presentation, let's just schrei Gewalt. Let's say it's just too tough a world. Then we're not being fair to our own potential, to our own human value to be able to bring hope. Okay, I saw that Meg lit up, so that means there may be some questions. So I'm going to take another breath.
Okay. Paul asks you to please define what an existential vacuum is.
Okay, I think that, Paul, an existential vacuum is existential issues are issues that help us try to find meaning in our life. And I think that many of us feel a vacuum and emptiness to finding meaning in our lives and feel that our lives are filled with despair because they feel meaningless. Okay, so that's how I would define it. Paul, I hope that's helpful. You can let Meg know.
Elaine says the books written by Corrie ten Boom are also amazing testimonies of faith, written while in concentration camp and later ministered to many others, including the guard who beat her sister.
And I hope on the list that we send around, you can send that book. There are some very moving, it's a very moving presentation. Keep going.
And Susan Malloy says, how do you know you matter?
How does one know that they matter? I think that we know that we matter when we have done something that either makes us feel a little more hopeful, or we find that someone expresses something to us that makes us feel that that action mattered. In Judaism, it's easy, or it's easier. And that is that when we perform a mitzvah, when we do a good deed, when we bring any kind of joy to the world, where we make a little bit of a difference, those are opportunities, I think, for us to be able to feel the sort of feeling that I'm trying to express. It is a little bit ambiguous because each person, I mean, I'm reminded of John F. Kennedy's book, Profiles in Courage. I've quoted this before because it's so meaningful to me. And it's actually becomes part of a Jewish blessing indirectly. And that is that when I used to watch Profiles in Courage on TV in the Midwest, it was on Sunday nights. And at the conclusion of each episode taken from his book, Profiles in Courage, there was an eagle on the screen. And the eagle, with the background, in the background, a voiceover would say, "These stories can provide hope and inspiration, but courage, each person must work that into their own soul." And I think that that is something that becomes important when Debbie Friedman writes in A Prayer for Healing, which all of us could use in today's world. She says, may we find the courage to make our lives a blessing. When we feel that our lives are a blessing in some way, when we feel that we have found a certain amount of courage, I think those are all things that can make a difference. Go ahead, Meg.
Suzanne says, thank you for talking about despair. I fight against it daily.
Yeah, I would just tell you, just parenthetically, and that's again a reason. And if you internally can find, if you can't find it, Meg, I will get the link because they recorded the Sarah Hurwitz program. I think to hear all the various things, because I didn't mention all the things that college students found moving. I think that would be immensely helpful. Because I think it helps all of our mental health and gives us all kind of a shot in the arm. But the most moving presentation that I was given in the class, that the students had to give presentations, tomorrow's the final class, but in the social justice class was a young woman who devoted her presentation to a friend who had committed suicide, and she did it on mental health. And this was given, I did the timing poorly. I didn't manage the time well. It's a 2.5-hour class. She had the last 15 minutes without a break during the whole class to do her thing. And in fact, I said, do you guys want to wait till next time? And she said, no, I really need to give it today. And she gave that presentation, was on mental health, and they were riveted. So the despair, Suzanne, that you talk about, I think is a wide scale thing. And that's why I think this presentation on hope is so important for us, to find something for which to be hopeful and grateful. Sorry, Meg, I kind of cut you off.
That's okay. William asked, can you suggest techniques for improving listening skills?
What did you just say? That was a joke. That was a joke. Okay. Yeah. I think first of all, it would be, if you want a scriptural basis for it that is acceptable to everybody on this screen, read the biblical book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 3, for which the Byrds made the song famous. For everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to speak and a time to keep silent. And I think there is a recognition that sometimes we just need to keep silent. I'm going to suggest that when I became a father-in-law, and I learned this the hard way, because as you can well tell, I like to talk. I spoke once to our daughter-in-law when I should have practiced the following exercise. And I think sometimes we need to practice the following exercise. And that is what I'm about to do. Okay, you heard the silence. Okay, it's just to listen. Even Meg was going to jump in thinking maybe I had paused for a breath. That is an exercise that I think is important. It reminds me of a person who went to a place where they were only allowed to say 2 words every 10 years. They wanted to learn how to listen. So after 10 years, they came out and they were asked, what are your 2 words? And they said, bad food. So they went back in for another 10 years. They came out and they said, uncomfortable bed. And they went back in for 10 more years. And when they came out after now 30 years, their 2 words were, I quit. To which the sponsor of this said, it's no surprise, all you've done for 30 years is complain. So I think that with a little less complaining and a little bit more practicing of just using our 2 ears instead of our 1 mouth, techniques, meditation can work. the opportunity to just listen to books rather than read them, to listen to music. Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav suggested everybody should take a 1 hour a day walk in nature, not to speak, just to listen. These are all things that I think people can do. Go for it, Meg.
Okay. It's from an anonymous person. I can be hopeful about many things, but not optimistic. What do you think the difference between how we are affected by hope versus optimism?
Okay, I think that in a world in which we have hope, we may have hope that our world may be able to have a little bit more, whatever you are defining hope as, without it meaning being optimistic. Okay, I don't think that we need to be optimistic about our world, but I think we need to be hopeful, because I think that hope is more of an internal feeling that we can give to ourselves through our actions. There are times that I'm not real optimistic, no matter how hopeful I am that I'm really going to make a difference, but that doesn't make me filled with despair. It just makes me less optimistic than I might be. But I'm ever hopeful that I can continue to do things that maybe ultimately will make a difference. Late at night, when I'm dealing with my own existential vacuum, do I really think that my life has mattered? Am I optimistic? I can't honestly look you on the screen and say, yeah, I'm optimistic that my life has made a difference, but I can be hopeful that perhaps it's made a difference. I think it's the ability to live with the uncertainty of journeying toward a promised land without being optimistic that we may ever get there, that not yet phenomenon, that we might not yet reach a time when we can be filled with optimism, but that we can be hopeful that we can be on the journey. I hope that was helpful. I'm not trying to be punny there, by the way. I hope that was helpful. Go ahead, keep going, Meg.
Also, thank you for your many insights, including the importance of our personal, thankful Amen prayers and the need to listen to others.
Well, thank you for that. Anything else? Any questions?
A question, sort of. I had a revelation as you spoke to Megan's question. Could it be as simple as the awareness of I am, then I matter, am equals matter?
It could be, because remember, that's part of what the divine statement was. I am what I am. Okay, I was what I was, and I will be what I will be. If we're going to take that our life matters, if you're going to build upon the I am, and if we're going to believe that each of us has something for which we can give hope and some place for which we feel that we can make a difference, if we're willing to acknowledge that, okay, then I think that we can recognize I was what I was. So there was a time when maybe I was more or less hopeful or filled with despair. I was what I was. Now I am what I am, but I will be what I will be. I have the capacity for growth. So I think that the I am and that will matter in what way I grow. I think that's a very insightful thought. I appreciate your sharing that. It'll probably be added to my next presentation about this. I think it's a wonderful insight. Thank you for that.
And next question, how do we concretize hope?
How does one concretize hope? I think it's so different for other people. Wow, it's such a poignant question for me personally. I come out of a background where I used to want to be a baseball player, probably still wish I'd become a professional baseball player. And one of the many reasons I wanted to do that is at the end of the game, one knew who won the game. Okay. In life, I don't know that we ever know for sure. We're kind of left in an ambiguous state. And I'm using this not to get a laugh, but as a point. There was a child psychiatrist who was laying a sidewalk, and the neighborhood kids were running around in the sidewalk before it dried. And he went out and he just started yelling. And the neighbor said, "Hey, you're supposed to be one who loves children. Why are you yelling at the kids for running in your sidewalk?" He says, "I love children in the abstract, just not in the concrete." Okay, I think that hope can be an abstract concept, that hope can be something that fills our hearts. I didn't want to talk about, but I'm going to right now, the soul. I believe the heart meets the mind at the soul. And there are certain things, I mean, if you ask me to give you a concrete example of what makes me love my wife or my children or my grandchildren, I don't think it unfair to them if I give a concrete example and say, well, I like that they laugh at my jokes, or I like that they give me a hug. It's this abstract feeling. It's what Dr. Frankl calls the hope that kept people alive in the concentration camps. It wasn't something they could touch. It wasn't something concrete. It was this abstract feeling that, yeah, I'm going to wake up in the morning. And he gives examples in his book, as you well know, of people who they could tell were about to leave this world, that they had given up. And the example he gives is somebody would smoke a cigarette, okay? They would smoke a cigarette that they had stashed away because they had lost hope. They had a tangible thing to give them some hope, right? A cigarette, a taste of life, the way it was before they were in a concentration camp. And yet that tangible thing was ultimately a sign that they had given up their abstract hope that they could survive, because they wanted to just have that thing right now. Maybe we need to move away from the stuff from the concrete to the abstract feelings that we generate among others. The feeling you get, to come back to the importance of touch, when you give somebody a hug, can you say what the thing is? No, you have a feeling. And I think that's somewhat irrational. So I don't know if that helped or not, but keep going, Meg.
Sherry shares that hope is a thing with feathers.
Okay, hope is a thing with feathers. Maybe Sherry can put in the chat some way of explaining what she means by that.
We'll wait for that.
Okay, keep going. You can ask
I
something else.
created this mantra. Each day when I awake, I say, I am thankful, grateful, always hopeful, never woeful.
That's nice. That should be part of what you send around with my reading list.
Okay. Betty says, thank you. The audio, this is more to me. It's cutting in and out and is distracting her. Sorry. Pamela says, thank you for such an inspirational talk. I am hopeful.
Okay, that's good to hear.
And Sherry says it came from an Emily Dickinson poem about hope. Beautiful. And one of our attendees would like you to give 3 examples of ways to cultivate hope.
Okay, 3 ways. That's a great question. 3 ways to be able to cultivate hope. And that is, in some way in the midst of this holiday season, reach out to somebody who is in need. Maybe it's cans of food to a food bank. Maybe it's serving a Christmas dinner, wearing masks. When you do that, being safe. Maybe it is helping out an Afghan refugee that is coming into Northern Virginia, for those of you who are in the DC area. Okay, maybe it is contacting a long lost acquaintance that you haven't been in touch with to say, hey, listen, as we celebrate the holiday season, I want to reach out to you. Maybe it is saying a kind word. I think the best way for me to sort of summarize this, and you can take this however you wish, is there's a Yiddish proverb, which I've quoted before in presentations, but it so fits right here. And that is that if you assume that the person sitting next to you, wherever you're sitting right now, is the Messiah, and they are just waiting for you to reveal themselves, but you have to do something kind or say something kind. And so you begin to do and say kind things. Let us assume for a minute that that person sitting next to you is not the Messiah, or is the Messiah but doesn't reveal themselves. If you are saying and doing kind things, then will it really matter? So I would urge you, as an expression of hope, to reach out to someone in need, to help with the Afghan refugees in this area, to be able to call a long lost friend, to be able to make peace with somebody in your family who maybe you've been having some sort of a conflict with, and say, look, we may have to agree to disagree, but let's go forward. These are all things that I think can bring us hope in our world.
Okay.
Anybody else on there before I go into a conclusion?
I think you should go into a conclusion.
Okay, and I will be ending, for those who are looking at the clock, I will end at 11. Okay, even though I have till 11:05, because my wife tells me, she says, you never end earlier. You always go over time. But that's because of my sermons. But this isn't a sermon, this is a presentation. Okay. In his chapter, The Case for a Tragic Optimism, Dr. Frankl says, okay, and this is on page 179. Okay, he writes that wouldn't it, he says, you may of course ask whether what we really need are saints, in our world. Wouldn't it suffice just to refer to decent people? It is true that they form a minority. More than that, they will always remain a minority. Decent people he's describing, not saints, but decent people. And yet I see therein the very challenge to join the minority. For the world is in a bad state. Remember when he was writing this a long time ago. But everything will become still worse unless each of us does our best. So let us be alert in a twofold sense. Since Auschwitz, we know what humanity is capable of. And since Hiroshima, we know what is at stake. And I suggested in our world, if I was going to leave you with a message, wouldn't it be great to prove Viktor Frankl incorrect and to turn the minority of those who may be doing acts that fill us with hope into a majority, just simply from the little things in life? I remember the song that is called Think of Your Fellow Man, Lend Him a helping hand, put a little love in your heart. You know it's getting late, so please don't hesitate. Put a little love in your heart, and the world will be a better place. And the world will be a better place. Perhaps as we try to build the minority of those of us who can find hope in our actions by putting a little love in our hearts, by loving our neighbors as ourselves, by doing the little things in life that can illuminate the darkness. These are all ways that we can perhaps be able to build a world where we can live together with each other in hope. And the way I want to conclude, because it is Hanukkah, and because I want to end on a light note, and because you will say anything will seem hopeful after you listen to me sing this, I want to close, given the fact that Disney Plus is running that feature on the Beatles that some of you have watched. I want to close with the Beatles version of a Hanukkah song. Meg, are you ready for this?
Absolutely.
Okay, first of all, for those who don't know, tchotchkes are like little junky things that I have an immense collection of. You just need to ask my family that tells me I am the hoarder of tchotchkes. Okay, they're little things that we collect over the years. Here we go. And latkes, I think everybody knows, they're potato pancakes. Here we are. Ooh, I need your latkes. Guess you know it's true. But all I got were tchotchkes, so that's what I'll give you. Latkes frying, presents buying. It's what we do each winter, 8 days a year. We're lighting the menorah, each and every Jew. We're learning from the Torah the things we have to do. Candles burning, we're all learning. It's what we do each winter, 8 days a year, 8 days a year. We clean out our menorahs, 8 days a year. We sing of Judah Maccabee. It's almost over, folks. Each night we get presents and have a lot of fun. 8 days makes much more sense than having only one. Dreidels spinning, I'll be winning. It's what we do each winter, 8 days a year, 8 days a year, we clean out our menorahs. 8 days a year, if only they would cancel school. Ooh, I need your latkes. Yes, you know it's true, but all I got were tchotchkes, so that's what I'll give you. Latkes frying, presents buying. It's what we do each winter, 8 days a year. I hope that each one of us will light a candle for peace. And let me conclude by reminding you that it was a small town in Montana, and I do not remember the name of it, but they were honored by the Anti-Defamation League in their concert against hate when confronted by vandalism to Jewish homes that were putting menorahs in their windows. A local Catholic church put a menorah in its window where there was a school, and it too was vandalized. And the editor of the newspaper put a kit into the newspaper of how you built a menorah. And according to my recollection, 29,000 people in that town had menorahs in their windows after that article appeared and that kit appeared in the newspaper. The vandalism stopped, and they were able to eliminate the despair of anti-Semitism and vandalism in that community by coming together to be able to create a flicker of hope in a small town in Montana. If they could do that, then what are we waiting for? If not now, when? I want to thank all of you for enduring not only the presentation, but my singing. And I turn things back to you, Meg, and to you, Jennifer, or to whoever has closing remarks.
I think it's just me now. Thank you very much for a wonderful program. If you have a moment, I suggest you look at the chat and see all the thank yous and all the love flowing your way.
Well, thank you. Thank you to everybody who wrote, and thank you, Meg and Jennifer and Amber and all of you for making this possible.